it's Robin, and today I'm here with my August wrap-up. I have quite a stack of books to show you. I read 13 books in August, so I'm going to get right into it because I have a lot to say about them. So the first book that I read was Hex Hall, and that's by Rachel Hawkins, and it's the first in a trilogy of books, and it's about a girl, Sophie, who gets sent to a school called Hex Hall or Hectate Hall, and it's a school for paranormals, or that they call the Prodigium. And it follows her in, getting into this world. She's lived with her mom and hasn't really been involved with a lot of other people that are gifted like she is. This is her story in her, first semester or part of the semester there at the school. And I really enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars just because it was like, it was good, but it wasn't great. It was good enough to where I wanted to continue the series. So the second book that I read in August was Demon Glass, and that's the second book in the trilogy. And I gave this one 4 stars. I liked it a lot more. It took place at the school, but also in London, and I love books that are set in London. And it follows her when she's getting to know her dad, who's been kind of an absentee parent in her life, and she gets, more in touch with her powers in this book, and there's a ton more action, and I liked it so much better than Hex Hall. So if you read Hex Hall and you didn't really like it, or you weren't, amazed by it, keep reading this series because it gets so good. And as you might have guessed, the next book that I read is the 3rd book in the Hex Hall trilogy, and that's Spellbound. And this one was my favorite of the trilogy. It was also action-packed, and you get into her family history, and it's definitely a good wrap-up to the series. Another book that I read in August, I don't have because it's a library book, but it's Spellbound, and it's also by Rachel Hawkins, and it follows a different character from the Hex Hall series, and I'm not going to say who. I guess you could tell if you, ever look into the synopsis. The main character in the next series is also part of the paranormal world, and it's her going into a real high school and having to kind of blend in for this mission, and it is actually really, really good. I can't wait for the next book to come out in that series. I'm actually not sure when it's coming out, but I'm sure that I will be pre-ordering it. And so after all of the paranormalness of the, the Hex Hall and Spellbound books, I decided to switch it up and read something contemporary. And who does contemporary like Sarah Dessen? And I read That Summer, and this is, I think, the first book that she wrote, and so I wanted to read it because it was short, and also it's the first book she wrote, and Devin's already read it, so it's something that we could talk about. And I wasn't overly impressed with this book. It was good. It's not my favorite Sarah Dessen book, that's for sure, but it was, a good contemporary read, and it was a nice switch up after I read Hex Hall. So if you like Sarah Dessen, I'm sure that you'd love this book. It just wasn't my favorite Sarah Dessen of all time, and I ended up giving it 3 stars, I think. Okay, the next book I actually just finished. I started this book while we were still in California, actually, and I just finished up, I think, the last 50 pages, and that was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. And this is a memoir about her family and growing up, and it is amazing. If you like memoirs, even if you don't like memoirs, it reads a lot like fiction, and I think anybody would really enjoy this book and appreciate what she went through and her family dynamic. It's definitely interesting, so you should probably check this one out. I gave this 5 stars, and it took me a while to finish it just because, we were in the midst of moving, but I'm really glad that I did. The next book I also don't have with me. It's a book I rented from the library, and that's On the Island by Tracy Garvis Graves. And this book was actually a recommendation by Geraldine at Starian72, and she said, don't judge this book by the cover because it looks really cheesy and all that, but it's definitely worth the read, and I'm so glad that I did because this book was so good. On the Island is about a high school boy who is going on vacation with his family in the Maldives, and he has a tutor that's coming with him, and their plane crashes on an island, and that's where the story kind of takes off and starts from there. And it is so good. If you haven't checked it out already, you should. It's an adult novel. I guess, I don't know if it's considered chick lit or you can find it in the adult fiction section at Barnes & Noble, I know that. But it's a great read, so definitely go check that out. And thank you, Geraldine, for recommending it. It was so good. It was probably one of my favorite books that I've read all year, and so much so that I bought the novella, and it's called Uncharted. And I think it's like 22 short little chapters or something like that. And I have that book on my Kindle, and I read that also. I gave both of them 5 out of 5 stars. I was really surprised with the novella. I wouldn't think that I would have liked it as much as I did, but it was just as good as On the Island. And I actually pre-ordered Covet, which is a book coming out next month, I believe, and I can't wait for that one. The next book that I read this month, also don't have it. It's from the library, and after I read Just Listen, I was kind of disappointed, and I wanted to read another Sarah Dessen book because I really enjoy her writing. It just wasn't my favorite, so I picked up from the library The Moon and More, which is her newest book, and I really liked it. It took place in Colby. If you've ever read any Sarah Dessen books, it's a little beach town, and her books take place in like one of few settings. Some of her settings are more suburban, but this is in this beach town, and it follows a girl who's torn between, you know, something bigger than a small town life and her life there and outside people. And it was really good. It was probably one of my, you know, top 2 favorite Sarah Dessen books that I read so far. So if you haven't already read The Moon and More, I would definitely recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I'd probably end up rereading it again, and definitely going to own it when it comes out in paperback to match all the rest of my new paperback Sarah Dessen books. Oh, the next book I read was Out of the Easy by Ruta Sepetys. Devin read Between Shades of Grey, and she really liked it. So I saw this book at Barnes & Noble, and I almost bought it, and they're like, wait, I'm going to see if the library has it. So I checked it out, and I loved it. It takes place in the French Quarter in New Orleans, and she's the daughter of a prostitute, and she's trying to apply for college and make more of her life than just, you know, being a housemaid or working at her bookstore there. So I gave this book 5 stars, and I definitely want to own this also. I should have just bought it at Barnes & Noble, but someday. The next book that I read was Back to Contemporary, The Statistical Probability of Love at First Sight by Jennifer E. Smith. And I was scared to read this. I've owned this book for a while now, but I didn't want to get into it because there's so many people that didn't like this book. But I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Yeah, I gave it 4 stars. It was really good for what it is, a story about love at first sight. People talk about insta-love, but I think when things in your life are going on and certain situations just match up, there's a time and a place where, you know, it might be ideal for falling in love. And I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the main character a lot. I wasn't too fond of the love interest in this book. He was just meh to me, but, you know, she really cared about him, and I really liked her story and the stuff that she was dealing with her family, and I think it brought a lot of depth to the book, you know, for a contemporary book that I thought would just be all about love, love, love. So if you haven't read it, I really enjoyed it. So if you're hearing reviews like, it wasn't too great, it wasn't for me, personally, I would reread it, and I'm glad that I bought it and I own it so I can read it again. The next book that I read, The Way Out of Left Field. It is an adult mystery book, and it's called Reconstructing Amelia. And this book is about a woman, Kate, who gets called to her daughter's school, and she has committed suicide. And at first she just thinks, oh, it was suicide, it was investigated, but someone texts her and tells her that Amelia didn't jump from the roof of the school, and it gets into her investigating the murder. It also flips back and forth between Amelia's stories in the months leading up to her murder. I loved it. It was really good. I gave it 4.5 stars. Something about it wasn't 5 stars for me. I was having trouble putting my finger on it. I think it was because a lot of the characters were just so unpleasant in this book, and I didn't like them. And I think the only 2 characters that I really liked at all in this book were Amelia and her mom, but other than that, it was really good. I read it in one night. It's not a little book either. It's almost 400 pages, and I couldn't put it down. It's just paced well enough so that, you know, something happens, you're like, oh no, now what happens next? So it's definitely worth checking out if you're into mystery or suspense novels. Definitely give it a go. I got this one from the library too, but it's definitely a book that I would like to own someday. Alright, and the very last book that I read this month, it's really short, it's a really quick book. It's called Waiting by Carol Lynch Williams, and Devin actually read this book first, and it's really quick because it's written in, it's not like a poem, but it's her thoughts, and it's very fluid. It's almost as if, you know, you're just talking to her and having a conversation with her. And I gave it 5 stars just because it's about a girl whose brother committed suicide, and they were very close, and this is her coping with it afterwards. And she's torn between 2 guys, and it's a love triangle, but it doesn't feel like a love triangle in the book. It feels like you're trying to get over it, as London is. And it was good. Like I said, this book is really short. It's a really quick read. So if you're into books like this, it's definitely worth checking out, especially because it is so fast. But also, it's a great story, and it's kind of inspiring the way that she pushes through something that's so tragic. I couldn't even imagine dealing with something like that. And I think part of the reason I gave it 5 stars was just, you know, the subject matter as it is. It was so serious, so it was really gripping for me, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad that Devin found this at the library on a whim, because I've never even heard of this book or Carol Lynch Williams before, so I'm definitely going to check out some of her other books. And if you've read anything else by her and like it, please let me know, because I'd like to read more by her. Alright, so that's it. That's all that I read this month. I'm not going to have a TBR for September just because I'm starting a second job this month, and also I don't like having a strict pile of books that I have. I have a big pile that I have from the library that I've been kind of flipping through to see what interests me. Right now I'm reading What Happens Next by Colleen Clayton, and I'm lagging in this book. I don't think I'm liking it very much so far. I have to give it some more time though, because it's still early, and a lot of people have told me already that they really enjoyed this book, so we'll keep trying at that. And I also tried to read Entwined by Heather Dixon, and I couldn't get into it. It's a fairy tale book, and it's a retelling about the 12 Dancing Princesses, I think, or something like along those lines. It was okay, but I just couldn't get into it. It's not particularly my cup of tea, so if you're into fantasy, I wouldn't, you know, recommend against it. It's just not, it wasn't for me. And I read a lot of books in August, so I'm just deciding what I want to read next, and I have a few pre-orders coming in. Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell coming out the beginning of this month, and there's another few books that I'm really excited about, so I will definitely keep you guys updated, and let me know what you're reading below. I know this was a really long video, so thank you guys if you made it to the end. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye bye.